All right, so we have about an hour together, and I've done a couple of these in the past, and I think that I want to be very clear. I'm kind of here for you guys, here to cover what's most interesting to you, and so here's. Well, first of all, can I get a quick show of hands for how many people were at the talk yesterday that I did? Okay, so about 2/3. So I'm not going to cover any of that content again. Since you guys have all seen that. So in terms of focus today, I think one of the things I like about these masterclass sort of forums is that it provides for a more frank and sort of open dialogue about the realities of building a business. So I suppose also I should get a sense for how many of you have either been involved with building a business or are keen to do so in the future. Right, so it's pretty much everyone, so good, okay. So well, the focus will be very much on the realities of building a business. A lot gets skimmed over, a lot gets covered differently in the media from what I think the reality is, as you'll no doubt have observed. And so one of the themes here is I want to try and cut through the noise when it comes to the realities and the public impression of starting a company, and just try and be as practical for you guys as possible. So there's three things that I thought we'd cover. The first is actually take a quick look at the Quid technology. We didn't do that yesterday, and there's been a lot of people asking about it. And so I thought it could be good just to show you that. Also, I attended some sessions yesterday, and those technology companies that didn't show the technology, I felt a little bit aggrieved, because it's all generic, but it's like, well, what's the product? What are you building? And it's something unique that we're building. So I'll probably spend about 5 or 10 minutes just giving you a quick overview of the product, and we can come back to that if you have more questions. And then the theme of today is that it takes 50 people to start a great technology company. So I have some notes really on that topic, and why I think that's important, both if you're leading the creation of a company and also as a career strategy. And then we should have plenty of time for Q&A actually, so we can dive into a range of topics that you might find interesting, but to help guide your thinking about topics that could be good to ask me, they are as follows. Finding product market fit, by which I mean the process from first concept to a point where you have a product which is resonating with the market and beginning to scale. Gaining your first sales in a company, from the very first sales through to a point where you can begin to hire salespeople to run a more scalable process. And raising venture capital. Been involved in about $100 million worth of fundraising in the past decade, everything from seed funding through sort of growth rounds. Happy to answer any questions on that. And sort of this one I've put timing and technology trends, really this idea of the technology cycle and knowing or trying to figure out when is the right time to be going into a certain technology area. It often takes 10, 15 years to see an area of tech play out. It's possible to be too early. It's also possible to be too late. And it's almost impossible to gauge that exactly right, but I thought, if you have questions around that, happy to share my thoughts so far. And then building teams from the ground up. So there's some topics that I'm happy to cover. If you ask questions outside of that, I may well be able to take a pop at it, but if it's not an area that I feel have expertise or anything to add, then I'll pass. So let's start with Quid technology. Any questions before we get started? All sound good? All right. Okay, let's see if we can switch over. So a little background on the Quid product before we jump in. I think I might just show you a sort of typical client example for how Quid gets used. So, well, first of all, the original concept behind doing this product, going back many years now, is a general frustration with the lack of what we do with the world's information, actually. So Google's motto is to organize the world's information. That's their stated mission. And they do a very good job of organizing it in order to answer very simple questions where the answer is already known. And most of what we want to use the world's information for is like that, right? We want to find out what the flight times are from San Francisco to London, or we want to check a time zone, or look up a historical fact, or find a paper on a certain topic. And what it does very well is they've catalogued the world's information and allow us to go from a question through to finding the piece of information on the web that tells us what we want. Now, what it doesn't do is help us answer questions that are more complex and where the answer is not yet known. And being here and through the work that you've done prior to Oxford, I'm sure that you spend a lot of time actually thinking about questions where the answer is not known, as does a massive amount of the world's knowledge workers. So the entire management consulting industry, the entire advertising industry spends their time figuring out answers to questions where no one yet knows the answer because it's too specific or it's too complex. And so for that, Google doesn't really help us much at all, right? It can send us to reports, but it doesn't help with the fundamentals of research. So the concept behind Quid is, how can we take the world's information and make it a whole lot more useful for answering big problems and big questions? And the product's kind of taken twists and turns over the 7 or so years that I've been working on this and building this out. And we finally reached a point in the tech development about 18 months ago where we'd made the whole thing work in a web browser. There were some fundamental R&D problems underlying this. In particular, Google has PageRank. So they have a way originally through the explicit links that people code between web pages to understand what's more important or less important. But when it comes to the kind of thing that we want to do with the data, we needed a new way to actually link the world's information, to link pages and to link documents. So what we attempted to come up with is a way of taking a set of documents, understanding the concepts and the language in any one document, and relating it through the language and concepts rather than explicit links. And this had never been done before, certainly not at scale either, in a way that works. And so the core innovation behind Quid, and what we spent several years of R&D kind of focused on, is how do you connect vast amounts of written content through the concepts in the documents. We got a version of that running, and then we didn't have the visual interface to go with it. And to do that several years ago was impossible in a browser. So we had to have a combination of products which the analysts would use. At one point they had 4 different products. So to go do a search here, to save the data here, and then to visualize it with a different product. And about 18 months ago, we brought that all together. So in a single web-based product, you can now do everything from having a question through to having visualization and insight. And we're the first to make anything work in a browser with many thousands of independent objects. So that's opened up whole new ways to visualize information in the browser. So a number of breakthroughs were necessary, but once we got it into the market, it's really flown. So over the past 18 months, we signed over 80 blue chip clients. And in the past, almost all Fortune 100 companies, or Fortune 500 companies rather. And in the past couple of months, we've announced our first multi-million-dollar enterprise contracts, one of which is with the Boston Consulting Group, second largest management consultancy in the world. And they've started rolling out Quid at scale now. Why? Because it takes the work that an analyst needs to do, particularly the first 3 weeks of a project, from 3 weeks down to as little as 3 hours. And they tested the product rigorously over about a 1-year period before they committed to the rollout. So massive time saving, improved quality of insight in a range of topics. So that's a little context on kind of what we built, why we built it, and the journey to get to where it is today. So I'll give you a typical use case. As I said, we've got kind of these 2 main camps now using the product. We've got ad agencies and media agencies, and we've got management consultancies. Typically, management consultancies are dealing with questions around, or at least for Quid, they're mostly using it around growth-related questions. Because that's when an organization needs to look outside and say, how can we be better, how can we grow, how can we compete, and so on. And the other main use is ad agencies, where they're taking a brand, taking a concept, and trying to figure out, how can we get this brand to get the biggest adoption possible within the communication and landscape that's already out there? And also, what's important to the brands that we're managing and creating? And outside of that, there's many, many companies that will just use it directly. So an example of that is, I was meeting with one of the biggest food companies in the US. they do about $10 billion a year in sales just in yogurt, right? And so they have 4 groups in that company dedicated to consumer insights. What are people thinking and feeling about the foods that they sell, that they could sell? And those teams typically do their research through a combination of surveys, just simply going out and asking the American public, what they think about certain topics. And they speak to experts, they do manual research and so on. So there's a huge amount of manual effort that these 4 teams go through. And this is an example of what we showed them with Quid. And this is typically how we will set up an initial conversation with a client. So we said, what are the kinds of questions you have? And they think about things like, what are the next big cuisine trends going to be in the United States? What health food claims should they be putting on their products? What is the changing perception of sugar in the United States? These are the big questions they try and answer. So I'll show you how you can answer one such question with Quid. So if we want to look at sugar and the changing perception of sugar in the US, then we start out, and Quid has already indexed 3 major data sets. So we have company information, we have news and blogs, and we have patents. Companies comes from CapIQ, news and blogs comes from Moreover. We update it every 15 minutes or so. It's about 1.5 million global English language news sources. And then patents we have from Thomson Reuters. So a question like sugar and regulation, you would come in and you can see within Quid, much as the initial experience of Google, you can look for everything with sugar in it. So 2.3 million articles that are about sugar over the past 2 years. That's when we started indexing this data. And you see that we've got a number of filters on the left. So we've got country filters, we've got date ranges and so on. Or we could go a little bit more refined here and hone in on articles that mention sugar and regulation. And now we've gone from a couple million articles down to 40,000 or so articles, still a large number. Now, this food company is only really concerned what people think in the United States. So let's restrict it to articles published in the US. And then we can also restrict it to articles such as the highest ranked news sources, which will be the likes of Business Week, Forbes magazine, NBC News and so on, Washington Times. So now with a little bit of creative filtering around what it is we really want to look at, we now have 3,000 articles, and it's estimating in the initial analysis that about 1/3 of those are unique. So now we can save this, and we've got, we've cast a net over what it is that's relevant to this particular investigation. And then we can click this link that says Create Network. Now what it does here is it sends out the 3,500 articles off to our servers in Chicago. And what happens now is we parallelize the analysis of this data. There's a huge amount of data included in this 3,500 articles. And Quid is now reading through all the words and concepts within those articles and running a comparison to the words and phrases in every other article. It's a massive computation. About a year ago, it used to take about 90 minutes to run this query. So in a single day, an analyst might be able to run 4 or so pieces of analysis. And now we've managed to get it down to about 90 seconds or so. So we've massively condensed the time involved. What it also does is it goes through each article and looks for the companies, people, concepts, brands that have been mentioned, and then it structures that as metadata, which means when we get through to the analysis stage and we can now visualize this, then we can look for brands that have been mentioned, see where they lie, and we can start to get some numbers around either distribution or the amount of, if in the case of company information, the amount of funding events that have gone into a particular segment and so on. So since we are a little short on time, we'll skip straight through to the visualization. So what you're looking at now is about 1,000 articles in one visual map on the sugar and regulation space. Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt.
No, go for it.
Can you clarify the 31% when you create, why it's still including all the results? Is there a deduplication so it doesn't affect the weighing or anything like that?
Yeah, exactly. So and we can see exactly how many articles ended up So it's 1,008, right? But we started with about 3,500. So what happens, we find when you look at kind of news as it populates across the web, is that often people will just republish articles, right? So a good article might get republished through 10 or 15 different sources. And when we used to leave those in the network, it created a lot of noise. So instead, we now have a merge threshold, which is set by default to the level that usually works well. But we have in the advanced settings, you can actually adjust that setting. And what it means is that we can collapse down an article that got republished and maybe tweaked very small amount through 10 different sources gets collapsed down into one node. But we maintain the information. So within that node, if you click on a node that has multiple articles republished, then it will still say where it got republished, but it will only come up as one node.
Sorry,
yeah.
For the purposes of this product and what it's essentially trying to communicate, does that increase? I mean, that's surely when you have that kind of republication, you get a lot more influence. So it actually changes the way the question's being answered. Like, is that reflected throughout the product too? Yeah,
exactly. So you can look for any number of variables that might suggest how influential an article or even a set of concepts are, which I'll show you that just so you can see how it works. So so now what we're looking at here is a visual map of the sugar and regulation space, right? Generated within a couple minutes. And each node is a news article. So I can mouse over any given article here, and I can click on it and then come in and see what it's about. So this article is called "Court Won't Reinstate New York City's Big Soda Ban." And so any given piece of information I can kind of drill in on, I can click through and see what's happening underneath. And the colors have been set according to the algorithm's definition of the topics. So on the right here, we can start to get a sense of what are the big topics that America's concerned about when it comes to sugar and regulation. Number one topic by number of stories in the past 2 years is diabetes. So the biggest sort of immediate health risk for consuming too much sugar. We can also see a whole cluster here about obesity and children's obesity in particular. So that's number two. One thing that caught their eye as we presented this to them was why is there a cluster that's about tobacco in a network that's supposed to be about sugar? And then when you drill in, you see that the public's increasingly making a comparison between what happened with tobacco in the United States and what's happening today with sugar. So that was a topic for them that they said, oh, well, can we drill in there? Can we look at it a bit more closely? So you can either recut this network and just zoom in, or you can go back to your search and now look for sugar and tobacco. And it might have a whole nother set of consumer insights. Where is this company within that dialogue? That's a very easy thing for them to understand. We also see the New York soda ban and so on. Now I'll just show one more view, and it gets to this idea of kind of how the idea is populating, who's important in the network. Now if you want to have an influence on this, if you are this major food company and you want to have an influence on the conversation around sugar, then you want to know who is influential within the network. And for that, we can do a completely different view and say, let's cluster it by the people mentioned. As I said, we've extracted the metadata here. Let's aggregate that. Let's look for the social sharing of the articles with these people in it. And then let's look for the article count, which is this republication number. So how much does the media care versus how much does the public care? And then we can recut the network with this completely different view. So now we're looking at a very different view. So these are the most influential people within the sugar and regulation debate. I can now click on a node, and each node's a person. I can see that Michelle Obama is right next to Bloomberg. But you'll also note that they're not connected. The connectivity in this view is showing us which people are related based on the concepts. We see that they have a similar position in that they're as prominent in each other, but it turns out that when it comes to Bloomberg and Michelle Obama, they're dealing with very different topics. Bloomberg's focused on regulating sugar in New York. Michelle Obama is focused on the issue of children's food in the US and avoiding childhood obesity. We can cut this many different ways. We can also look at this as a timeline view. And so now we're looking at the trend, right? And for them, it was interesting for them to see this isn't a massively growing trend, despite all the buzz, particularly in San Francisco on this topic. Across the country, this is actually pretty flat. And sometimes you'll see timelines that are completely bimodal because they're driven by two major events over the last couple of years. Other times you'll see them following a quarterly cycle if it's more to do with earnings and company performance. Sometimes it's trailing, sometimes you see all these different trends in timeline. But it's interesting in this case that it was actually relatively flat. But there are a couple of spikes. So we can go in and ask ourselves kind of, what's that about? You saw this cluster of light blue right here. So what's going on then? That was the announcement of the soda ban in New York. So there was a lot of new attention to this particular topic. You'll also see that there are links going back in time. So when the soda ban was first announced was actually, it looks like somewhere around kind of July 2014. But you'll see links going back to prior articles, in this case, like 9 months earlier. What that's showing them is this is where the concepts were first raised. So it actually allows you to go back in time and ask, where did these ideas come from? What were the influential reporters? What were the influential sources going back 9 months that first started talking about this? And I can go in and again, kind of look at some of the early articles on this topic and say, okay, why are laws restricting soda sales make perfect sense? It's a Condé Nast article. So for marketing and for really any control over communication, when it comes to brands or people or even political campaigns, it's now being used in the US political campaigns as well, which is pretty exciting. It gives you a whole new view. So what we're really trying to do is go beyond Google, beyond the index, to giving you a whole new way to navigate the world's information. So I just wanted to give kind of a quick, I know it's been a 10, 15 minute overview of the product. Happy to answer any questions on that, or we can move through to the theme. I know you'd have lots of questions, but
I was just say, as far as, have you guys looked at like academic articles and things like that as far as working with research institutions and bringing that into the product? That seems like a really interesting place to go.
Yeah, totally.
Sorry.
Do you want to say it again for the camera?
Sure.
Okay.
So I guess my question is surrounding academic articles and research institutions and sort of plans or what you're looking at as far as partnering with organizations like that.
Yeah. Well, we have started working with the University of Liverpool and their chemistry department, which is more of an experiment for now. But we've got some really fascinating early results because, in particular in the sciences, there's a big question, where do we put our resources? What should we work on? What should we invest in? And if you can map, we could do many examples right here live, but if you can map every area of, let's say, patents being filed within universities around the world in a particular area of chemistry research, then you can see what people are filing and don't bother building the same thing again. And they're using it for both patents and also academic papers. So really this works on any document set. You can run it against any document set that you have access to, and you can upload those documents and sort of map that. Now, we may well be adding academic papers into the product and just index them for you. So instead of having to find them on one product and upload them, you can just go in and map them directly in Quid. So that's an interesting one. The other interesting one, of course, is Twitter. But ultimately, we'd like to set up a structure here whereby we can end up with all the world's information under this platform. Right now, it's 3 data sets, but you could imagine this with 40 data sets. So as analysts, you'll never need to go to multiple products. The vision is that you'll just have your Quid terminal. You have Google, it's where you do your personal stuff, and it's kind of search for amateurs, and then you have your Quid terminal. It's not my phrase, actually. I met with the head of the biggest media company in the US, and I ran a little demo for him, and about 10 minutes in, he kind of rocked back in his chair and went, I see what you've done. You've made Google look like amateur search. So I sometimes use his phrase. That was a nice way to describe it. That's what we're trying to do here. So you'll use this for your professional. It's pretty interesting, isn't it, that you have, I have a 4-year-old nephew now, and he loves watching videos about, farm machinery, navigating farms, right? So he goes and watches tractors and lorries and things. And he's using an iPad And he uses Google to go find videos about tractors. And he's 4 years old, and I was watching him recently using Google and thinking, this is also how the President of the United States accesses the world's information. It just seems somewhat dissatisfactory. And I don't think we're going to be in a position in 10 years' time. I think we'll laugh about this fact. I think Quid's one of the products. We're leading the way at the moment in terms of how advanced the product is. But I think we'll see a lot of competition in this space over the next 10 years. And I think 10 years from now, we'll be laughing about the fact that all we had was a list of results that was mostly driven by, or at least hugely influenced by kind of ad-driven content. Although that doesn't supposedly skew the search results, the whole product's designed to send you somewhere else, right? So, I mean, that fundamentally guides product development. It has to, because that's their business model, 99% of their revenue. So this is not ad supported, this is a subscription model. The licenses are $25,000 a year, and that gives full access to all the data, 20 hours of analyst time, and so on. So it's not a cheap product, but it's not ad supported, and we're not going to make it ad supported. So we never have to skew the truth. Yep.
I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about that decision to go for the enterprise market and the subscription model, and what this product might look like someday as a user-facing thing that any of us could just log in and use.
Yeah, it wasn't obvious from the start, if I'm honest. Again, people say, people describe business ideas as though they just came up with it one day and then started building it, and then it worked out just how they thought. But as I said, the overall vision of what we wanted to try and do with information has been consistent. But what that would look like, we really had no idea. Well, we thought we knew what it looked like, and then we were wrong, right? And then we were wrong and wrong and wrong, and eventually we kind of tuned into what's right. But at the start, it wasn't clear whether it should be a consumer-based product from day one, or whether it should be a true enterprise product. One of the factors is actually an economic factor, which is that the computation behind every Quid analysis is so complex at the moment that it actually costs meaningful money to run each search. And that doesn't matter on a one-off basis, right? It probably just cost us $2.30 to create that network. There's not a huge amount of money. But advertising doesn't do well in supporting searches that cost $2, right? So until compute cost and storage cost comes down, then it's not feasible to make this product as a consumer product. Actually, the economics don't work. You have to find another model. So that was one factor. And another, I think, is just, as we built it, the curve of how easy it is to use has been, improving, and it will continue to improve. But as you can see at the moment, it's still somewhat scientific. It's like an instrument that you can kind of tease out insight with, and that's not ideal for consumers. So I think that over maybe the next 5 years, we'll make Quid easier and easier to use, and eventually the price point, the economics, the ease of use may come to a point where everybody could use it. But even if they do, up until recently, I still thought maybe everyone in the world would want to use Quid one day, and maybe it would be an alternative to Google, or certainly highly complementary. And yet, I think there's a very good reason now why that will never happen, which is that most people on the planet don't really ask questions where the answer's not known, right? For most people, that's not something they want to do, actually. Like, everyone in this room probably didn't even think of that, because you're like, well, there are all sorts of things. I want to look at academic papers, and I want to look at, various industries we're looking at, and so on. But that's not actually very common, right? That represents maybe 1% of all the world's potential users. That 1% happens to make, almost all of the world's big decisions. And so, and redirect capital and investment and so on. So that's really the audience that I think is Quid has a long-term home with. It's not everybody. It's the folks that are asking difficult questions. So should I'm just conscious of the fact that I should probably say some things about the topic of today. So why don't I do that? I really appreciate the enthusiasm for the product. And we can certainly come back to it. So hold that thought, gentlemen at the back, and we'll come back to the question. So let's see. Well, I can leave this up, I suppose, while we chat. So in terms of the theme, you know, I call the talk, it takes 50 people to start a great technology company. I did that a little bit to be antagonistic because I think, you know, almost all the talks here today, and in general when founders and business leaders stand up, they talk about themselves and tend to talk about their story and kind of how things came to be. And certainly that's obviously, you know, we're all interested in people, so that's always interesting to hear. But I think, I called it this because I think this is something that gets massively overlooked, and that's that in reality, you don't get to build anything really important without about 50 people. And it's those 50 people that make the product, it's those 50 people that make the culture, that make the company work, that make the sales work. And they're often overlooked in the way stories get told. And so I'm partly calling it that to just make a stand on just being aware of that. And so a few notes, and I'll go through this rapidly so we can get on to kind of other QA topics that you guys might be interested in. So the first is about, you know, so why does it take 50 people to start a great technology company? So one of the things is around the idea, right? And we've touched on it a little bit already with this idea that someone comes up with an initial, you know, market hypothesis or vision or idea. But the reality is that does change over time. However good your research is about what a market opportunity looks like and what a product should be, you're almost certainly wrong in one way or another. And if you've got the team thinking about that and thinking about the ways in which it fits and doesn't fit, then it's that feedback loop as everyone goes out and tries to sell it or tries to build it, and it's that feedback loop among everybody that really evolves the idea. So an idea is rarely one person. If it's going to be truly great, I think it's rarely one person's thing. Very, very rare, in fact. You have people like Jeff Bezos maybe. You know, there's an occasional visionary business thinker who, for the most part, will kind of crack it and continue to lead the vision. But it's extremely rare. So in general, I think it's a better thing, even with the idea, which people assume comes from one person a lot of the time, to create a culture where the idea is owned by everybody. And then it can continually evolve. And the other thing is, technology landscape, if you're building a tech company, the technology landscape's changing so quickly. You know, if your idea worked in 2008, it sure doesn't work now, because everything's changed. So in order for the business to work long term, I think it's a really powerful thing to have everybody thinking about the idea and what you're doing. So getting that feedback loop is important. Then there's the main one, which is all the processes that it takes to make a business work, right? And I'm happy if you're interested to talk about kind of what are the different parts of Quid. But broadly speaking, we have a outbound sales function, right? So folks that are finding leads and doing everything from qualification through to sales. We have a client success team who focus on training in the Quid product and also supporting various analyses. And they ultimately own the relationship with the end users. We have a technology team which makes up more than half the company at this point. And we have the technology team in a few different pods. Ultimately, we have, because our stack's quite broad, we have a team that focuses on data. We have a team that focuses on the back-end algorithms. We have a team that's focused on front-end. And we have a team that's focused around the text analytics as well. So we have 4 different teams within the technology group, and then of course we have an ops team. So there's various teams there, and at the scale that we're now at, the amount of change involved. We just raised another $40 million. The amount of change involved over the coming year just can't be managed by one person. If you've got 50 people with their heads in a game, all thinking and acting like entrepreneurs, then you can have optimal and self-evolving sales processes, optimal and self-evolving. Oh, we just also hired our first marketing person. So we now officially have a marketing team as well. But these things can evolve as the business grows, and you can kind of work more on setting where do we want to go and have people lead and build in all these different areas, which without any one of those areas working, the business doesn't work. The third thing is this concept of, I think, I've been absolutely fascinated with organization design since I was a child. And that came from the fact that I grew up on a farm. And so my granddad actually had he worked on a farm, but he had a big garden which he farmed. And so some of my earliest experiences, from 3 or 4 years old, was going there at the weekend and then working with our family to sort of farm the big garden. I have like 40 cousins, so it's a big family. And so we'd all show up there at the weekends and then work together, farming the garden. And seeing the way he coordinated everybody, and he was clearly leading, the whole family in how this thing worked. It just gave me that early experience of the power of bringing together groups and what they could create. It was fascinating to me that we'd create so much, produce from this garden and ultimately sales from it as well. And so I think for me, underlying the whole concept of starting a company is this idea of coordinating groups of people and the magic that can come from that. And it can be a truly magic thing when groups work together. So the third point I wanted to make about this topic is the idea that 50 people, 50 smart, engaged people with a broad range of skills, right, from all over the world. We have over 30 nationalities in the team. When that team is working effectively and in a coordinated and efficient way, then anything's possible. Building anything, even things that haven't been built before, going into markets, taking on giants like Google. I mean, I just have this really fundamental belief that the 50 people coordinated is so much more powerful than any other structure. And of course, that can also scale. And I saw that with I've also seen this with Yelp. I was the first employee of Yelp. I moved there straight from Oxford and had worked in an incubator, and we prototyped 4 different things. I was a designer, helped prototype various products, and one of them that we prototyped was we called Yelp. And that's how I joined that team from day one, and just saw what it was like to be part of that team. And the height of function, I think, was somewhere around sort of 60 people. Everything worked. It was incredibly fluid. It was an amazing thing to be part of. And ultimately now, we serve 150 million people every month. We have, I think, $3 or $4 billion worth of enterprise value that's been created through that process. It's an amazing thing to be part of. Which brings me to the 4th point, which is about career strategy. So, almost everyone here said they're either part of building a business or want to be part of building a business. I think if you want to do that, it's often overlooked the value of being one of the members within a high-functioning 50-person team. It's easy to think that if you want to start a company, go be person number 1, or be the founder, be a CEO, be a co-founder. It's often overlooked career strategy to find a team that's really executing and that has huge growth potential, and try and be one of those 50 people, whatever it is that you're best at within those 50 people. And and as I was kind of making notes for this, I was trying to think of a few examples. It just wasn't hard at all, because I've got 3 friends that were in the first 20 people at YouTube, when it was just getting up and running. That's why I have the YouTube name Bob, by the way. So it's just youtube.com/Bob. Although the rapper B.O.B. has recently taken the handle, but still the username is Bob because I was in the first 20 users or something of YouTube. But those 3 people just went on a wild ride. I mean, one of them ended up opening up a massive engineering team for them in Japan, which is where he met his wife and ended up staying in Japan. But sort of the wild ride that those 3 people went on in YouTube as it grew was incredible. Airbnb was another one. A friend joined Airbnb when he had about 40 people, and she helped set up the community management for Airbnb. And again, I mean, she was actually one of my housemates at the time, and just seeing the sort of wild ride that she went through over that year, certainly like the first year she was there, was pretty remarkable. And obviously they've gone on to do good things. And then Uber. I have a friend that was in Uber in the first 200 people, so not even first 50, but 200, and is now going all over the world setting up engineering teams and again having a really amazing ride. So I just wanted to sort of put that out there as a thought around career strategy. Now, it's not necessarily easy to kind of pick those teams, but I also don't think it has to be Uber in order for it to be a really fulfilling experience to go in the first 50 people. And then the final thought around 50 is just the shift in emphasis that I think is probably appropriate to make between the concept of founders and the concept of the first 50. In future companies, I would be keen to either call the first 50 founders, so that, you know, a year or so from the, maybe 4 years out, the first 50 people the last 4 years get called founder. You know, sort of an extreme opposite scenario, or just to have none named, because I think ultimately it's a historical remnant more than a role, and yet it has significance as a role. So within an organizational structure, as it grows, then it can be a difficult thing to navigate when you've got people in the org who have special titles that no longer necessarily correlate with what the company needs to do at its new stage, right? So you have this, I mean, you don't do that with any other role. You don't say, okay, you're head of product, and then that's like for perpetuity, you know. If you're doing a great job as head of product, then you keep the role. So it just that concept around titles being in perpetuity is a challenging thing in practice, as I've seen it play out across dozens of companies over the past decade. It is almost never a smooth thing that pans out. So for that reason as well. So they're my notes on why it takes 50 people to start a great tech company. So let's just maybe go back. Well, so yeah, I'm happy to answer questions on that, or maybe I'll just pull up the slides real quick so you can see, you know, topics for Q&A. So we have, I think, 17, 18 minutes left? So we can hopefully answer a bunch of your questions. Oh, you've asked a lot. No, that chap was next, I think, in the white jacket.
We started on how easy is it for you to add like something like a scientific journals or something into Quid first? And just a follow-on question, if you add any new stream of data or analysis like journals, what kind of impact does it have, A, on a computational basis, on a storage basis, and more importantly, on the search time it takes for an analytics to come back to you with the visual map?
Well, I'll answer the second part first. So when we add a new data set, we essentially build out a new piece of infrastructure to manage that. So it doesn't slow down the prior data sets or analysis that we're running. And then in terms of how difficult each data set is, it largely depends on the size of the data set and the nature of it as well, but mostly on the size. So we've recently started building products around Twitter. And Twitter is a vast data set. If you want to take the whole thing, the whole Twitter fire hose, it's just an enormous data set. It's orders of magnitude bigger than everything we have at the moment, right? Yeah. It's an enormous even on a daily basis. And so if you want to do that historically, I mean, that's why almost no one actually stores Twitter. You have the API, you can collect what comes through that day, but most people don't store it. But what we want to do, because we care about trends and allowing people to look back in the past, we care about storing it. So we look into solutions like you can have 10% of the fire hose, which at least allows you to monitor the concepts across time. And then in terms of the timeline, the first one took 3 years to integrate, 2 or 3 years. The next one took about a year, and the third one took about 4 months. So the time it takes us now that we've built out the platform to integrate new data sets has dropped substantially. And now, we estimate the next one will take somewhere like 3 months. And eventually we'll want to get to a point where we can integrate massive new data sets in a matter of weeks. So we're laying the foundations for the infrastructure that will let us do that.
Hi, 2 quick questions. The first is, you mentioned you just added your first marketing person, and I think most people say it's important to really get your product right before you bring on the marketing. So I'd love to hear more about kind of how you made the decision that it was time for that.
Yep.
And then second, with such a sophisticated product, when you're hiring for non-technical roles like marketing and sales, do you find that you need people with some kind of technical background, or that's not so necessary?
Right, okay, thank you. So for the first marketing hire, we've certainly done things in marketing in the past. Of course, we had to get the word out there somehow, but it was largely through various people's efforts and through some of mine and some of my colleagues' efforts over time. And as you rightly point out, it's best not to try and scale sales or marketing until you get to a point where you have enough product market fit, which is kind of my first point on here. I think the early marketing is a different thing. It's about trying to understand and learn where the product market fit is. But then when you've got the product market fit and you've got a year's worth of sales results like we did at the end of 2014, then it's very different. At that point, we know our users are here. We know what they look like. You know, we know how to find them. And at that point, your growth is really only limited by your sales. And so marketing becomes the top of the funnel that's bringing people in, you know, that you can obviously convert into sales. So it starts to become really, really important. In our case, the marketing lead that we brought in was one of our biggest clients, interestingly. He'd been selling, he'd sort of championed Quid within one of the large media organizations and had become so adept at it that, you know, he was one of the best people at describing Quid, inside or outside the company. And so at some point we were like, you're so good at selling this, you know, maybe you should join us. So he joined about 3 weeks ago. So we also held out a little bit because we really wanted him. But he was in a senior marketing role at a big company, and it took a little while to, you know, make the transition and get him in. So I think, you know, yeah, they're my thoughts on sort of timing of the first big marketing hire that you make. And in terms of, you know, technical backgrounds, when it comes to the client success team and the sales team, we don't require technical backgrounds. I think, I mean, maybe early on it might have been a bit more important, but if the product is so hard to use that we can't describe it and sell it without having an engineering degree, then we're probably making some mistakes in the product. And so at this point, you can certainly be an adept user without engineering skills. And what we generally look for as a benchmark is sort of Excel skills, right, as a proxy. If someone's been able to develop advanced Excel skills, then they're almost certainly going to be just fine, you know, developing skills with Quid, because it takes about as long to learn how to use as Excel, I would say, at this stage, and we're trying to bring that time down. So yeah, I mean, half the team are highly technical, highly skilled in very specific areas of tech, and then about half the team has a distribution of technical skills, but it's certainly not a requirement. I think on sales and marketing, you know, the people side of it is so much more important. Let's see. Have you asked a question yet? No. Okay. Let's have this chat.
Hi.
Hi.
You talked about optimizing your search algorithm and reducing time from 90 minutes to 90 seconds. But how about infrastructure? Because traditionally, you know, companies have a big pain point of infrastructure. So you need more processing, you add more data centers, and it's been always linear. But from your growth, you might that will become in the future a big challenge for you. How do you handle that?
Yeah. Well, when we started out, we managed all of our own infrastructure, and we had a server room. There's this amazing building in San Francisco called 365 Main. And when you're in San Francisco, you should just go and ask for a tour. And it's this, well, maybe it's not for everyone, but I find it fascinating. It's a building that was originally built to house World War II tank production. So it's this massive building with like enormous concrete walls. It's designed to withstand being hit by bombs, you know, directly in the Second World War. And around it, if you walk around the perimeter, you'll see that there's this huge rubber, you know, kind of gap, like not concrete, but rubber in the sidewalk. You have to look for it, but it's all rubber around the entire perimeter. And it was designed, and it's right on the water, near the waterfront in San Francisco, such that if the earth was to fall away around this thing, that it would actually float. And it has its own power generator. It's the most ridiculous building. So it's designed to build tanks and like not stop tank production, but then it's been repurposed as a data center in the new age, and so it's a very reliable place to put your servers. Because even if San Francisco's entire power goes out, they took me in this room with the power generators, which is a room this size, these enormous power generators that will just keep, you know, all the big websites up and running if San Francisco goes down. So so we started out there because I thought it was a cool place to put some servers, and but eventually, you know, it got too complex and we moved over to rack space. So at this point, when we think about scaling our infrastructure, we actually only have one person in the team who is full-time on DevOps, and then, you know, he has contacts, and we have people that work, you know, with us at Rackspace. So when we want to bolt on another data set and we need to add, you know, 4 new servers or whatever, we can get them set up. We have a dedicated private space with Rackspace, so we don't share our servers with anybody else for security reasons. So I hope that answers it. Any other questions? Let's see. Okay, how about chap at the back?
And so as a follow-up on that, like, who are your clients? Are they mostly based in the US? Because since your data set, I guess, is it Rackspace, your location is in the US. So, like, for this kind of analysis, are you looking to lower down the latency, like for European customers or Asian customers?
Well, Rackspace does a pretty good job of managing some of that for us. Most of the users today are in the US, so it hasn't become kind of a really big problem. I think with consumer sites, latency matters a huge amount. With Yelp, we ended up having the ability to serve from many different countries as soon as we went international, because the difference between a load time of 0.2 seconds and 4 seconds is the difference between your site working or not, if it's a consumer product, right? Because people don't wait 4 seconds, they just hit close, done. But with a product like this, where you already have to wait 90 seconds to generate a network, the difference between 1 and 2 is not enormous. So we have users in India, we have users in Korea, Russia, UK, all across the US, and they all seem to find it, just fine. In fact, the slowest place for Quid tends to be being used in India, and even there, where we're really scaling up in terms of usage, there we keep asking, "Are you sure it's okay?" And they're like, "Yeah, it's fine. It's fast." So Rackspace seems to be doing a good job around it. And what Rackspace will also do is, I also find this an interesting thing about the internet, which is that it's a tree structure. So the closer you are to the trunk, the faster you can get around the network. And there are trunks in the internet, like bigger and smaller trunks. So if you put your data center on a trunk, then you can get to anywhere you need to go much faster. San Francisco is also a big trunk. There are some images of the internet on the internet that you can look at, and it's pretty interesting to see the sort of neural sort of nature of this structure, and just know that if you care about speed, put your boxes as close to the trunk as possible, and you massively reduce the time it takes to get anywhere. Okay, got 5 minutes. A few more questions. Yep.
Hi, thanks again for coming. It's been really interesting.
Thank you.
I'm just curious, I know you don't like the term, but I'm curious about how big your founding team was, and just that process of going from that initial team to the team of 50.
Yeah.
Kind of just on timing of when you took C Capital and what that process was like.
Yeah, okay. So interestingly about this company, the first 6 people I hired are now CEOs. So, of other companies, to be clear. So I don't know if this is the right thing to do. It probably wasn't, I'm not sure. But what I did do early on is I looked for leaders. And I hired, perhaps because I had this concept in mind around, everyone being really engaged in trying to make the business work, beyond just doing a job, really engaged in making it work. So I hired people I thought would be good leaders who could run teams, run departments, hire, inspire, and so on. And so, that certainly worked in a sense that they've all gone on to start other companies, and now 6 CEOs involved, all of whom I'm still in touch with. But, for us, that was sort of the trend. Like, people worked for anything from kind of a year, 18 months, up to even 4 or 5 years within that original team. But the business has been around for about 7 years now since it originally started. So that's kind of, when it comes to the very original people, that was sort of the trend with us. Then, and then in terms of transition, I think, again, may not be an optimal path, the one we've taken, because for us, there was so much R&D involved, and it comes a little bit to this issue of timing, right? I know now that we were too early. And, what I was trying to do in 2008 and 9 was, I don't think anyone will have really cracked that other than us until about 2018. So that's 10 years before anyone else did it, right? And we were pushing on making this thing work in a browser, and the browser technology wasn't even there. Till HTML5 came out, there was no way of doing this. So we were knocking on the door for many years. And if you do that, then you have a different cultivation of the team. Then the priority is just staying alive long enough that when the world is ready for the product, you're still in the game and you're in a driving seat and you've got a quality team. And that, for us, that's really what we did. And it taught me a lot about timing, because I think with Yelp, we were like right on time. And that's a lot to do with the vision of the CEO and the co-founder and CTO. And we were 6 months ahead, perhaps, of when social kind of really took off. And so, yeah, we struggled for maybe like the first 6 months, and it was hard to raise money. I won't name names, but some of the biggest VCs, out there, including prominent Oxford alums, turned us down in the first 6 months because they just didn't get the concept. And that was tough. But then we were there fairly quickly when things started to really take off, and we had already started to innovate and come up with things that got propagated throughout other social sites that we came up with. But with this company, yeah, we were probably 4 years too early into the game. And so the main thing I focused on is just trying to stay alive long enough. And I think the last couple of years, it's clear that the world's ready for it, and the tech's ready, and the clients are ready, and so on. I would rather be too early than too late. I think that, for me at least, a lot of the fun and interest in starting a company, and the reason I would do technology as opposed to other companies, is that you're creating something that's kind of magic at the center of the company, and that can be created in a number of ways. But I would rather be too early into a new technology area and be a pioneer and having figured things out for the first time than I would be joining a year or two late when you've got a lot of competition. I think that becomes much harder. And I just like doing new things. It's sort of, I suppose it's partly a personal thing as well. I like the challenge and the interest in trying to do things that haven't been done before. And I think that's energizing for a team as well. When a team knows that they're truly doing something that hasn't been done, then that attracts a certain type of team member. So.
Hello. I don't know to what extent you can talk about this, but it would be helpful, I think probably for some other people in the room as well, if you'd be willing to speak a bit about the 40 million you just raised and why 40 million and sort of the valuation exercise you underwent and what you had to give up in the process.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, in general, again, when you're raising kind of capital, building capital-intensive business, it's a very different exercise to most types of businesses, right? Like most companies don't need 60 million to put into R&D before they're profitable. And again, it's something that one should really, really question, because every time you take on money, you lose a chunk of the company, and you also put yourself in a position where the company could die, right? If you're not profitable, then you rely on raising the next round. And in practice, what I liken that to is, monkey bars that you see at the beach or at the gym or whatever, where you swing from one bar to the other. I liken it to the experience of starting out on the monkey bars, and you look and you can see them all, and you can reach them, and then someone puts a blindfold on and says go. Because you're swinging for the next stage, and the bar's there, but you've got a blindfold on now, and you're trying to grab that bar without being able to see it. So that's what it feels like to go through 3 or 4 rounds of venture capital. And you're always hoping that your hand doesn't miss that bar. But it can, and like if you don't catch it, you're out by a fraction, then that's it. So I think in general, trying to minimize the amount of capital you need is a very good thing. And everyone says that, and then people go out and raise massive rounds and like, yeah, whatever, but it's true. Like, raise as little as you can, and do as much with it as you can. Do as much with revenue as you can. I mean, I say we raised 60 million, but we've also got a huge amount of revenue on top of that. So this product is going to take a lot more than 60 to build, but we funded a lot of it through revenue, through working with clients. We sell $1 million service projects, and do it efficiently, and then use that capital to fund the innovation. We've been doing that for 5 years. So yeah, I mean, then I think the early rounds, you're selling vision and people, and the later rounds, you're selling results. And that's the difference between A, B, maybe even C, and like D and growth rounds, right? And it's a totally different process. Like raising seed A, B, for my experience, is a totally different process. That relies on getting one person really energized and hooked. And for us, we're fortunate that it was Charles Lowe who led the Series A, who's an amazing, quite visionary Korean-based investor. Then Peter Thiel led the B. Then Nicholas Zenstrom from Skype led the C. And for the first 3 rounds, I was really selling the vision of what we want to build, describing what I described to you at the start, but without a demo, right? Without anything to show them. And that was very different to the D, which has been us showing them decks of like subscription, renewal rates, sales results, and so on, and saying, here are our metrics. You pour water on this thing, it's going to grow. And a totally different experience, right? Way more pitches required, way more analysis of the business is involved. And so that kind of capital was just a very, very different, it was a different experience. That's the first time I've raised a true growth round, which we closed in March. But it took much longer than the others as well, partly for that reason, right? Because they're looking at the business. So hopefully we'll only have to do those kinds of rounds in the future, or maybe never raise again if we can get to profitability. That'll be the aspiration of the sales team. I know that we're officially out of time, I think, aren't we? Yeah. So I'm happy to stick around and answer questions here until like 1:30 or so, and I suppose we'll transition outside, into the lobby area. But I really appreciate the quality of the questions, guys. I mean, I think almost everyone here asked a question. It's one of the reasons I like kind of coming to Oxford, is the quality of the questions is genuinely better than anywhere else. I found that yesterday as well. And so I appreciate your engagement, and thanks a lot for coming. Thank you.